This is East Idaho Newsmakers with Nate Eaton.
Thanks for being with us this week. We are talking with Jeff Sweat. If you're from Iona, you probably know who he is, or Ammon, or Idaho Falls. He has just published his first book, official book, Mayfly. It's a youth thriller that seems pretty interesting. He is in town signing books, actually, at the Barnes & Noble. Jeff, thanks for coming in. Living in Los Angeles now.
Yeah, in fact, just came in this morning.
And you grew up here. You know East Idaho pretty well. Tell us how your days here led to this.
It's interesting. I think when you're a writer in Idaho, you don't necessarily have a ton of role models. There aren't a lot of authors that came from Idaho Falls. And in fact, the only one I really knew of was Wilson Rawls. But even though I didn't have role models, I had this limitless space, this kind of playground in Idaho where we could explore. You know, I'm one of 8 kids. During the summer, my mom would pretty much just wind us up and let us go. And my friends and I would explore along the railroad tracks and climb into old barns. And I really just think that there was no limit to where your imagination could take you.
Did you want to write as a kid?
I think I did. In fact, I remember writing my very first story, and it was in the shape of a blender, because that was the assignment in first grade. And I think from that time on, I was hooked.
So you grow up here, you go to college at Columbia, and at that point, what did you want to do with your life?
So I always knew I wanted to be a writer, but I think when you don't have that model, you don't necessarily know how to do it. And I think a lot of people are really cautious about you just jumping out into a world that they don't know anything about. And so once I knew I wanted to be a writer, I decided I want to be a journalist. And I was lucky that Bonneville High School at the time had an amazing student newspaper and a great advisor, a guy named Ron Bennett that I'm still friends with, and made me realize that I could get paid to write. And it was a pretty eye-opening thing. So I went to New York to learn about journalism and to be in this great media city. And for a long time, stayed in journalism. At a certain point, I realized that although journalism had done amazing things for my craft, for the writing craft, it didn't give me much time to really work on the kind of creative projects that I've always had in my mind. In fact, actually, at the end of the day, you're so exhausted, as you probably know, that you don't even want to open up your computer, much less write a book. And so I moved into marketing and PR and advertising, and now have a PR agency in LA called Mr. Sweat. And one of the things that allowed me to do is it gave me flexibility to finally work on the ideas that I liked. So it took me a really long time to get here, and I'm really glad to be here.
And the story that you told me the other day on the phone leading to the publication of this book, you seem pretty lucky, blessed, fortunate, because there's so many writers watching right now that have probably produced thousands of pages that get nowhere. So take me back to the beginning of Mayfly. First of all, give me a synopsis of the book. It's kind of a nobody lives past the age of 17, right?
Yeah, exactly. So it's I always imagined it as Lord of the Flies meets Handmaid's Tale with a little bit of Hunger Games. Time to time, I decide maybe it's more like a little bit of The Stand thrown in, but there's like all those things. So you kind of get a sense from that. But it's set in LA in a future where all the adults have died, and none of the kids live past the age of 17. So it means kids are the ones who are keeping the world together. They're the ones who are trying to make society run. And we see what happens when you take away the grown-ups. They've lost their technology and science and literature and medicine. And a lot of the things that we think of as being society, they are doing without, and so they're just kind of hanging on. And so it was just a really fun idea to explore and see what would happen when we put kids in charge of the world. And
it's dystopian fiction.
Yeah.
What is that?
So I think, as I say, dystopian is one of those words that people are never quite sure to make of. I always say it just happens to be a world where everything has gone horribly wrong. And I think it could be called science fiction, but it's really just taking a look at the future and using it as a way to look at our humanity, the way we interact with the world. And so I think science fiction and dystopian can always feel very popcorny, kind of like great. It's great entertainment, but it also can be important because it says more about the state of our current society than this future one we're exploring.
So you write this book, didn't you? Was it like your fifth manuscript or fifth story idea?
Yeah. So it was. I've had a lot of ideas that I never managed to really put to paper, and this story I haven't told you, so I'm going to tell you briefly. I was in my 40s, and I realized if I'm not going to write this book, I really don't know when I'm going to. I have had the idea. I wanted to push forward, and so I took a writing class as a way to give myself a deadline, and took that for a month or two. Came out of it with 25 solid pages, and I said, I'm going to try to finish this in a year. I didn't even know if it was possible. I'd never attempted something of this magnitude before, and I just kind of loosely said it, and it kind of worked, and I was moving along, and about a month before my deadline, I decided, I'm really going to do it, which was great, except for I thought I had about 10,000 words left to write, which is a lot of pages. I actually had more like 25 or 30,000 words to tell the story that I wanted to, but I had made this commitment. So I started cranking on it, and at a certain point I was writing 3,000 words a night, which, you say,
wow,
exactly.
A lot, yeah.
I mean, Stephen King writes 2,000 words a day, and I would do this all after I had put the kids to bed, because I was working in advertising, which is not a forgiving industry in terms of schedule, and I'm father of 3 kids, and so I'd put the kids to bed, start writing from about 9:30 or 10 until midnight, and I would just kind of crank. And the biggest enemy was sleep. I was so sleep deprived during this time that I started falling asleep at my computer. And so what I did is I rigged up a standing desk, and I typed standing for about the last week or 10 days. And even then I was still falling asleep.
Jeez.
So but I actually finished 10 minutes after midnight on the day that I said I was going to.
Wow.
So I think the lesson from that is you can do almost anything if you tell yourself you're going to do it. And it's like as with any deadline, you will manage to fill whatever space you have, and somehow it always comes through.
And it probably helped having that 1-year deadline rather than saying I'll take 5 years, because.
Well, I mean, and with creative projects, I mean, the biggest challenge is just starting and continuing. Mm-hmm. I know a lot of great writers who come to me and say, "How'd you do it, man? That's crazy," and they're great writers and reporters, and I said, well, I started, and I had this goal, and I also decided to give myself a little reward at the end. I was going to buy myself a nice suit if I got it. So
did you get the suit?
Actually, I went to Barcelona instead.
Oh, that's probably better.
So I think it worked out better.
So you can self-publish, which is you basically take that finished product and sell it on Amazon in a simplified way. You did not self-publish. From there, you have to shop it around, and don't you have to get a literary agent, and then they have to shop it to a publisher? How did that process go?
Yeah, it's a complicated and definitely a daunting process for a first-time author, because you just don't even know where to start. And so typically, you'll write the book, and then you'll send out a query letter with description of the book and 25 pages, and you'd send it out to everybody that you think would be, interested in it. And several people just didn't bother responding. A lot of people said thanks, but no thanks. What I found interesting was that the people who did respond and did give it even really a close look were people that I had some sort of personal connection to, was referred to. And I think it's really important that kind of like that, just that little personal touch made the difference. And when I found my agent, she was an agent of a friend of mine, and my friend had loved the book and sent it to my agent and said, "You should read this." And she said, "Oh, I've got a lot of books like that already." And my friend said, "No, I think you really need to read this. It's really good." And she did, and that's how we became connected. And even then, we worked on that manuscript together for a while to get to a point where we felt it was ready to shop around. And to that point, I would say it was kind of a standard drill. Like it's sort of, a lot of like setbacks and that kind of thing. But what happened is when we put it out to the publishers to tell them about it. I think it's sold within 2 weeks.
That's rare.
It doesn't.
That
happen.
doesn't happen. Yeah.
I mean, I think like there's occasional things it does happen, but I'm always almost embarrassed to tell people that because it's so hard as a writer to get anyone to pay attention to something. So I know that is almost miraculous, that happened the way it did.
Where were you when you found out it had been sold? Did you get a call, an email?
Yeah, my agent called me, and in fact, I know exactly where I was. I was sitting in the gas station in San Francisco with my family. We just left San Francisco Zoo on our way home. And I'm sitting there filling up the gas, and my agent calls, and I put the call on Bluetooth, so my whole family's hearing me get the news that we had this offer.
And what was the reaction after 14 days of?
I mean, it was pretty amazing to watch because we found they would say, oh, this person's interested, and this person's interested, so it was like, who are we going to go with? And the cool thing was that my editor, who ended up buying the book, was on vacation at the time she got the manuscript and somehow managed to read enough of it that not only did she decide she liked it, but she was able to put together an offer, and all in the space of, in her case, I think, less than a week. And so it was sort of amazing. So and because it happened so quickly, I think it was almost difficult to process that it had happened, because I had known that it wasn't going to happen anytime soon, and then it did, and it was,
But you're not done yet, right?
No.
So what happens from there? You have a publisher, Macmillan.
Yep.
And it's one of their branches, right?
Fievel and Friends, which
Okay.
is they did the Goosebumps series and a lot of the young adult titles that you would be familiar with.
Okay.
It's a great group of people.
So they say, yeah, we're going to buy it, and then what happens? What's the process from there?
So typically, book publishing has its own sort of seasons, just like films do. So you release blockbusters in summer and art films in probably the fall. And publishing is a little bit like that. So they wanted to make sure that they had a time of year that was great for a new book and a new author, which was May of this year. And so it was kind of making sure that we slotted it in the right place, and then my editor went a few rounds and ended up changing the book even more based off of our conversation. So she was amazing in just making sure that I had the world set up properly, that I was setting up the plot and the characters, and then everything felt complete.
So tell me about this Los Angeles scavenger hunt that was done in conjunction with the book.
Sure. So it's actually coming out in a couple of weeks. But one of the ideas, one of the themes that keeps on coming to the book is that kids are seeing these landmarks like Disney Hall or the Capitol Records building or the Hollywood Bowl, but they don't understand what they mean. They can't read, they don't know anything about the history of them, and so they're sort of surrounded by this civilization that is gone, and they don't know how to decode it. And so we came up with the idea, what if we could show these landmarks the way the kids see them? And so I went out and shot a bunch of VR images on a borrowed camera that I barely knew how to use, and I didn't have a cameraman, so I went out and shot them all myself, and then brought in a film compositor to create these post-apocalyptic versions of these landmarks. And so you see like fire in the sky from whatever battle they're in, that kind of stuff, and we're going to be uploading them to Google Maps, where you can kind of explore in 360 degrees this world that the kids live in. And then we thought, if we're doing that, we should build clues in. And so there's now these codes in there where you can go and you can redeem the codes to get custom pieces of content, like deleted scenes and scenes from the next book, as well as prizes. And it's just a way to kind of bridge the gap from this book to the next, and also kind of create a new way for people to explore the world of a book. Everything is changing. A book is no longer just a book, and we wanted to see if it was possible to bring that book to life.
You mentioned it's a bridge between this book and the next one. When is the next one coming out?
So I think we haven't set a firm date, but we're thinking it will be next year, probably at least by this time. And it's called Scorpion. So it's book 2 in a series.
And how many books do you foresee in the series?
I think there'll be at least 3. We haven't gotten that far yet to figure out. Like, I feel like sometimes a story just tells you where it's going to go.
Do you have in your mind how it all ends, or is that something to be determined?
I have an idea of how it ends. What I don't have is the how to get there.
Okay.
You know, I think that's pretty common in a book that a lot of writers like to start out with at least the end in mind, so they have this journey.
Yeah.
You know, and it makes it a lot easier. Like if you sort of know where you're going, then it's just a question of, you know, what obstacles do you throw in your character's way? How do they develop as they get there? And yeah, so I do have a good sense. I just I should say that's for book 3. Book 2 is actually written and delivered.
So that one's in the can.
So yeah, and I'm excited about that one.
What would you say to people watching that have written books or that want to write books and just, you know, are discouraged because of the rejection and they don't know where to go? What would you say? What word of advice would you have?
I have a lot. I would say, first of all, you know, just write. It doesn't have to be a book. It could be just observations of people on the street, you know, and so, and in fact, sometimes that's easier to work, because I think you need to work on your craft. You need to make sure you're great at observing the world and the way people talk to each other and body language and all these kinds of things, you know, so you should read a lot, you should write a lot. And I think it's important also to find your people, to find other writers or people with similar aspirations who can support you and help you to grow. And that can be hard in a smaller town, to find a good group of people. You know, so I would say go to, you know, a community college, take a class there, start to meet other writers. And the more you can kind of have a good writers group to support you, the better that will work out. We formed one in my neighborhood in LA, and my group workshopped my entire book, which is an amazing gift. So, you know, chances are when you're first starting writing, you're not going to be as good as you want to be, or even as you think you are, and that's something that can change over time. And then I think if you can find good people to provide you useful advice, that will make a big difference as well. So a good writing instructor or other good writers around you.
Mayfly is the name of the book. There's going to be people that think, I'm not really into, you know, science-y, dystopian type fiction books. What would you say to them to encourage them to pick this up and check it out?
Well, I will say my parents did not necessarily want to read it because it's not their genre. And they did. And my dad in particular called me up and said, you know, I was completely drawn into this world. And I always loved the way you use language, the way that their societies have evolved over time. And he said, you know I don't like science fiction. He said, but I really like this. So I think if my dad likes
He's probably
it,
what, in his 60s, 70s?
70s, yeah. So if my dad can come on board, I think it's something that will appeal to most people.
Yeah.
And I would say it's the kind of book that has a lot of great action, has a lot of humor, but it also makes you think. The most common comment I get from people after they read it is they say, this book just stays with me. You know, I don't see things the way I did before. And that's a pretty amazing compliment.
Yeah, for an author, you've got to love that. You don't want somebody to be like, I didn't get anything out of it.
Exactly.
Well, congratulations to you. This is pretty impressive. Iona, born and raised here in East Idaho, Jeff Sweat. Where you can pick up this book, buy it from any of the regular places, Amazon, Walmart, I'm sure it's on all of them. And we look forward to the sequel.
Thanks.
And welcome back home for the next few days.
Yeah, thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you, and thank you for watching. Have a good week.